In this lesson, we'll learn about the principle of appeal. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is a really important principle, and it's one that I think Disney animators absolutely nailed down right out of the gate in the early days of animation, just carried it on to the present day. If you watch any of their animated films, all of those characters resonate with you so well. You remember them, and that's because for each character, whether it was a hero or a princess or a villain or a little supportive sidekick character, they took different attributes of each one of those characters and they exaggerated them and pushed them to complement their personalities, their emotions, and even their environments. So that's what we're going to kind of do here with this little pirate character, is kind of explore how we could just make him look more appealing, something more interesting. So right now, as I look at this sketch, it's apparent to me that it is somewhat cartoony, right? But it's still kind of leaning towards that realm of something that's more kind of realistic. There's just a lot of qualities about this that we could just push a lot further. So really quick, if you look over here in the layers section of our timeline view, I've got this sketch on sketch 1, that layer. Sketch 2 is where we'll sketch our new design, and then line is where I'm going to pause the video and I'll put down some clean line work, and then we'll come back and make some final comparisons. The line work will give you the ability to kind of see how everything looks just a little bit more clearly. Okay? So I'm going to make sure on my cell right here for sketch 2, turn on your light table right there. That'll allow you to kind of ghost out the layers underneath. Okay? And I'm just going to use this swatch right here. Okay, and it's basically a blue swatch that I like to sketch with, and I took down the alpha just a little bit there. Okay, the first thing I really want to think about is the line of action. Right now, for this character, it feels kind of a little too rigid, a little too vertical. So something just a little bit more, kind of a more curvature to it, I think will really kind of help. And that kind of helps me kind of visualize where I want to place the head. Okay, so kind of starting to think about that. I like to, when I design characters, and I've got some courses in our library on character design in Photoshop as well as in Toon Boom Harmony. I like to break things down into simple shapes, and we also have some other courses by other authors as well that you definitely want to kind of check out, where they just kind of go through what makes an appealing cartoon character. There's a lot of different things that you can do to make a cartoon character appealing, and I think by focusing on shapes, simplifying things, will allow them to read a lot more clearly, as opposed to getting too many lines in there, getting too granular, too detailed with the form. Can be kind of damaging in the end. It'll become very muddy and will not read as well, especially when it's animated. So right now I'm just kind of loosely kind of working out my design here, trying to kind of get a feel. I'm going to go ahead and hide the visibility of that original drawing. It's good to kind of look at from time to time, but it's also good to kind of remove it as well, because you don't want to start to adhere too closely to it. You kind of become a slave to it in some regards. But things like his nose, just kind of coming back here to the head, this is where a lot of emotion, a lot of expression of the character, the soul of the character is going to be right here in the face. Okay, and so there's a lot of things that I think we can really exaggerate. Things like his nose. Let's give him like a bigger nose. You kind of look at the design of the nose I have right there, kind of the curve I have on the top of it. We could take that further. And that becomes a defining quality of that character. It's something that sticks out to you. As a viewer, you'll remember this pirate because, oh yeah, the pirate with the big nose, because there were several pirates, you know, and if you had several pirates, you're going to want to design them all with contrasting qualities so that they all are unique, they all stick out, okay? So little things like that, so that they all don't just kind of blend together. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was an early interview with Walt Disney way back in those early years, where he was kind of discussing what were some of the tricks or key attributes, some of the key elements that made their characters so darn appealing. One of them, I believe he mentioned, was the eyes. You know, they really put a lot of focus on the eyes, making them very expressive to really get emotions across. The eyes, you know, they say are the key to the soul, and I think there's a lot of truth to that when character design, because you can present a lot of emotion through the eyes. And so you'll notice that a lot of their eyes are a little bit larger. They vary across different characters, of course, in different films, but they make them larger because now they have a bigger shape, a more dynamic shape to play with, to really translate those emotions. So the eyes is one of the things I'm kind of exaggerating here, especially with his eyebrows. Kind of looking back at that original one, just kind of thinking about other attributes of the wardrobe. How well are they reading? Okay. So there he is right there. And one of the great things about working digitally here is we have some tools that essentially spoil us. But I may want to make that head a little bit smaller. Kind of made it a bit large. And that's one of the things that can happen if you zoom in a little too closely. You kind of lose sight of the rest of the drawing there. Okay, but just kind of working my way around, kind of thinking about how to play around with the relationship of some of these body proportions, making that forearm maybe a little bit larger than what we have in the original design, which is kind of boring, a little too close to realism right there. Okay? So little things like that, thinking about different qualities that you can exaggerate, I think are very important. Also making his knife maybe bigger, making it larger, little things like that. Things that will just read a little bit more clearly. You know, in the original one, his machete's kind of up and down, kind of bland. We could take this a lot further, just make it a lot more kind of interesting there. Something like that, something that's a little bit, you know, larger. And again, just not getting too overly detailed with different forms. If you get too many lines in there, it's just not going to read well. Adding this vest in here. Kind of want to see part of his waist in there so we can kind of see. He's kind of a skinny guy, I'm kind of visualizing. And then having that sash, again, looking at kind of at the original, that sash is kind of very symmetrical, very boring. Kind of making it more tight on one side there, and then kind of wider on the other. And so that kind of helps balance out everything. That way, everything's not perfectly symmetrical. Just kind of thinking about the pants now. You look at the original, the pants are very kind of symmetrical, very consistent all the way down. On this one, I want to kind of poof them out, make them more swashbuckle-like. You know, you look at a lot of old classic swashbuckling films. They got the big poofy pants coming down, so something kind of like that. But already, I'm really liking this so much more compared to what we have here. I'm kind of playing around with the proportions, seeing what reads well. And again, we can kind of take our cutter tool here and kind of resize a few things. We can also move around. When you make a selection with this cutter tool, you get a little pivot there, right there in the center that you can move around, and you can rotate from it. So that kind of helps. Now, ideally, when you're doing this, I would recommend doing more than one sketch. I think that would be very, very beneficial to you. That way, you're not settling on your first idea. It's through multiple sketches that you start to really kind of hone in on the personality of a character design. So that would be my recommendation to you. If you're kind of doing your own little pirate or monster, really whatever you're doing, I wouldn't really recommend copying me directly, but just kind of do your own thing. But do multiple sketches. I think that'll really be beneficial to you in the end. But again, just kind of making this comparison here, I'm really liking this so much more. This will resonate with me as a viewer more than this will. I'll remember this one much more clearly because I've taken different aspects of it and pushed it further. And this is something that's still pliable, okay? It's still got dimension and depth. It's something that can still be moved around, okay? And it doesn't feel as rigid because we're kind of thinking about that line of action. You also notice how I kind of leaned him forward, really trying to think about that aggressive nature. He's got that machete up. He's moving towards whatever it is he wants to stab, okay? All right, so I'm going to pause the video real quick, and I'm going to put down some clean line work so we can see this just a little bit more clearly. Again, if you're interested in, putting down line work and how you can be efficient in that regard, check out our Introduction to Character Design in Toon Boom. I talk about some of these different tools over here that you can use to do that. So we'll be right back, and we'll make some final comparisons. Okay, so here's my pirate character with the line work added. And so we can kind of start to make that comparison from this to that. This is just a lot more appealing to me because we've taken certain qualities and we've just pushed them further, even with his beard, his nose, eyes, eyebrows. Right in there, I think, is one area you definitely want to focus on as far as really pushing those qualities further because, again, those are things that are going to stick out to a viewer and resonate in their mind much more strongly than the qualities that this face has. And also just kind of playing around with body proportions and things like that is also very important. And then again, think about good lines of action, okay? Kind of like what we talked about. The line of action here just kind of feels a little too rigid. Whereas on this design, we've got a stronger line of action right there. And that's going to add a lot of fluidity. Lines of action, even if it's a stationary object, you can still figure out how to have some lines of action in there. If it's a stationary character, even just sitting or leaning against a wall, thinking about lines of action will help you come up with a better end result. Okay, so again, there's a lot of different things to consider when it comes to creating an appealing kind of cartoon character like this. We've got some other courses in our library that are animation related, but I would encourage you to watch them when it just comes to creating an appealing character that you could use for animation. In our next and final lesson, we're going to talk about another principle, which is staging. So stick around and we'll see you then.